Hello and welcome to DF Direct number 71, our weekly news show where we talk about the news, things we're working on, and answer questions from our Patreon supporters. It's a very special episode today. Could be described as an American invasion, hot boy summer. We're joined by a number of special guests, the first of which I will be introducing today for this hot boy summer special will be Sam Machkovech from Ars Technica. How you doing there, Sam?
So I gotta say, it's pretty warm out, but I've got a more pressing question. Do you guys know about like a WebMD for pets on the internet? Because these pythons are sick.
I unfortunately do not know about that website, but I do know someone who may know, and that is Adam, also known as EposVox from his YouTube channel, the stream professor himself. Adam, welcome to the channel. First time on DF Direct. How you doing?
Hello. No one told me about the glasses thing, so I had to improvise. We're good.
You're looking so smooth, man. But really, let's get down to business. First item on the docket this week is Spider-Man's PC port. Spider-Man Miles Morales and Spider-Man PC. Releasing in August of this year, there was a trailer dropped, as well as a number of specifications for different hardware, depending upon your settings. This is a port by Nixies, and the first person I'll go to on this is you, Sam, here, because you tend to cover PC ports for Ars Technica, and what's your response?
I gotta say, as long and as deeply as I have gone into both Spider-Man games on PlayStation consoles, the sight in this trailer of the ultra wide ratios really took my breath away. And this is the thing about this game. Spider-Man, as made by Insomniac, is one of these games that everyone loves and has wanted to play. One of these insane system sellers. And the idea of just perching up on a Manhattan skyline and looking out was already fantastic. But once you add that ultra wide kind of thing, the way they drop that in, you could just almost see everybody working on that trailer and working on the game sort of salivating to finally let that out. But when you look at what's coming, it's so exciting as a fan of console ports to PC to see Nixus really seem to be unleashed. We've got and I can't even get through all of the different things that this has shown beyond. I'm excited to see DLSS and DLAA from NVIDIA both being in there natively. Also all of the different little touches. There's a shadow complete top to bottom retouch that's happening here that looks really good. It's only a minute of footage that looks familiar, but it just and ray tracing, obviously, which is because we're going to finally be able to see what happens without PlayStation 5 as that bottleneck. Like, what's that resolution going to be like? How many multiple reflections are we going to get? Because this is a game that's rich with glass everywhere and puddles. Like, remember Puddlegate? Like it was so long ago, and now here we are with something that's like, all right, everything, uncork the complete potential, because Sony is clearly at this point shrugging its shoulders to some extent to say, yeah, the game's been out on console for long enough, now we can crack it wide open with Nixus.
Yeah, that's a good point, and this is obviously something I'm going to be covering on the channel, probably doing 2 videos, maybe an interview, we'll see. But Adam, what is your kind of reaction here to the specs that they put out? I don't know if you've taken a look at them, pointing out something like, it's like the GTX 1060 is good enough for about 1080p and 60 FPS on what looks to be like medium settings, I believe it was. It actually seems like a really reasonable port, given how the fact this was an engine that was for so long just on PlayStation consoles. So I don't know, what's your reaction here?
Yeah, obviously you're not going to be getting a lot of the higher end features that they're advertising in the trailer with that. But I think when you consider what you're running at for some of for like the 60 FPS mode on launch of Spider-Man before they added the 60 FPS RT mode, I think you're going to get a pretty reasonable experience. It's not going to look like the trailer, and I think that's going to... I've seen a lot of discourse already of people, being the PC versus console stuff, and like the PC experience you're going to get on a 1060 is not going to be that trailer, but it's still going to be really nice. And frankly, the game's art direction in the way that it's just so clean and clear, I think no matter how... obviously there's a limit, but like the more you pare down the graphics, you're still going to get a very beautiful experience. It's simple enough without, it doesn't have the Call of Duty effect of there's dust and particles and explosions constantly. Like, it's just a nice, clean city. And a lot of even the Spider-Man suit textures are simple enough that I think when you scale them down, you're still getting a wonderful looking game. So I think most people are going to be happy with it if they're expecting to run modern AAA launches today anyway. So,
well, my feeling is when you come from the base Jaguar architecture of the last console generation, you have so much room to go up, which means so many older systems should conceivably be able to compete with those ancient Jaguar cores and be able to at least, I mean, goodness, you could take hopefully a potato PC and get this to 30 frames a second and hand this to a kid who loves Spider-Man. And that's been, I mean, I can't tell you how many times non-gamer friends of mine just want to get Spider-Man in front of their kids and don't give a crap about any of the other technical stuff. So I would like to see that kind of scalability happen, but then that's a question of, well, as a closed architecture, at least PlayStation 4 could do all of the streaming wizardry needed to keep the entirety of Manhattan moving when you're taking Spider-Man from one end of the city to the other. I think that's going to be totally doable because they were able to get it done on PlayStation 4. But that's the test I want to see, is if you take an old gaming laptop, set it to 30 frames a second, and just start web swinging from one end of the city to the other on weak hardware, is it going to be fine? I think that's going to be, to me, as interesting as how hard you can push, say, a 3090.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because, I mean, at the beginning of that console generation, the last generation of consoles, we were pitting at DF before I started working here, things like dual core PCs with 7050 Ti's against the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. And it was superior at that point in time due to the fact that developers were still struggling with getting things done properly and fast on those Jaguar CPU cores. They were not as multi-threaded, the games back then. Definitely were not. But things have obviously changed over time, and Insomniac are definitely one of the studios that have always pushed the PlayStation 4, probably the best looking PlayStation 4 games, in my opinion, always. And, you know, seeing how we can scale that back on PC, that's one thing I'm really interested in. I'm interested in seeing how it runs on Steam Deck. Maybe that's an Oliver video. I don't know. And also, so my boy Nixies, you know, they do incredible work. I've always been a fan of their PC ports, Deus Ex and all the Tomb Raider stuff. But here they are definitely going above and beyond DLSS, DLAA. And I'm going to check out, probably in a video, checking out how the ray tracing compares to what we had on console optimized settings. And then I think there actually might be enough room in there for a whole entire different video, just covering the difference between DLSS and maybe the custom solution that Insomniac uses on console. Because that's one of the things, like, we've always known the quality there, but we haven't ever been able to compare it to a PC solution. So that's all. I think that's really all really have to say about Spider-Man on PC.
The thing that I have a question on, though, is this is yet another example of NVIDIA shoving its way in and saying our proprietary tech. When you look at, I don't know, PlayStation's relationship with AMD, is that just a matter of Nixus running the show and saying this is how it's going to go? Is the PC side of Sony has that sort of signature on a contract and says we're going to do it that way? That stuff is so curious to me, because you'd think AMD would love to get its way in. I'm sure, I have to imagine someone at AMD is like, hey, why didn't we get that deal done? That's the backroom stuff I find fascinating here.
I get the feeling it's due to the emphasis on the ray tracing. I think that's the big thing, because God of War had FSR, didn't it?
Yeah, the FSR 1.0 and then added 2.0 later on, but also DLSS. So there's, like, that's a really good question, but I think the emphasis on ray tracing here, and that was what it was known for on console. And on PC side, honestly, when people think ray tracing, they usually think of NVIDIA products. So maybe that's the connection there, but, you know,
we've got Zen 2 architecture doing the ray tracing on the PlayStation 5 port. So
yeah.
That's more of an open hypothetical question than really anything. However, let's also conclude with we're finally going to get some DualSense web slinging on this version, and I don't know how much more that's going to be enhanced. I just remember when I haven't been back to PlayStation 5 Spider-Man for a minute, so I don't recall how much of the impulse trigger and rumbling stuff was in that DualSense build, but any of that stuff is really good. I mean, I just tested Stray on PC with the DualSense, and it's nice to have the little cat nuzzles buzzing that way.
Yeah, that'd be cool. But yes, more on that when it comes out next month. On to our next topic. In Sony land, things are looking positive, but also maybe not so positive. I don't know. What do you think? Last of Us Remake, there's been some leaked footage, some leaked impressions that were on Reddit, then were deleted, and then some more footage came out. It's been a kind of weird and bizarre situation, but the generic kind of feedback when you read comments on like Reset Era or Twitter or elsewhere is that people are maybe a little bit disappointed with how far the gameplay is in advance in this remade, remastered version of the game. Adam, I don't know if you've taken a look at the footage and if you've played the original The Last of Us actually, or its original remaster. Did you have any comments on kind of the general atmosphere here?
I really like what I am seeing from the new images, but I'm in the awkward place where I got it for PS3. I didn't get around to playing it. The remastered came with my PS4. I didn't get around to playing it. And I'm at the point where every time the game comes up, I feel like it gets bumped down my list because it's just like I keep getting copies of it that become outdated because it keeps happening. But it seems like some pretty drastic changes in these leaked screenshots. So I am excited for that kind of thing. But in terms of the gameplay, like I'm still mad that supposedly Square Enix rebuilt Kingdom Hearts from the ground up because they didn't have the source code and they didn't touch the gameplay. So I'm kind of a lot of remasters don't fix gameplays when gameplay quirks when I feel like that is the opportunity. Make a game better. Like make it more playable if you're going to make it look better. But I don't have the experience to know how much needed improved on from the first one. I've only really watched it more so than played it.
Well, I was at one of the E3 events in Los Angeles when the very first Last of Us footage was shown. And I have to say, as I look at this leaked stuff, my brain goes back to this completely different time when I looked up at that screen and thought, how much of this is going to happen on a real console? And we're now truly at that point where conceivably no moment in Last of Us Remake will be pre-rendered, like 0%. That could be the case. Now, we're obviously going to have to wait and see. But the thing that really took my breath away in this current moment, in this current leak path, was the moment of the daughter and the dad having to go through some stuff. I look at it and go, oh, right, none of that's pre-rendered. And I think there are certain people who don't care about that, and that's fine. I think that stuff can be so fantastic. You don't get taken out of the game. You're there the entire time. You don't have to wait for a loading screen. You don't have to look at any weird compression stuff that proves that it's a video. It's all there. It's in that extra sort of way that your own TV screen translates real gameplay versus pre-rendered footage. So that's the first thing that stood out to me of that sense of, okay, you know what? I care about that stuff. I think that looks cool. Now, the other issue is the current conversation seems to say absolutely nothing in gameplay has changed. I do not believe that absolutely nothing will change. I also believe that the entire basic skeleton is going to remain the same. Same missions, same path, same geometry. Just the base stuff is going to be there. But the question to me is how many of the beat-to-beat things, because remember, Last of Us is about feeling like the world is out to get you, the odds are against you, and you're weak, and you have to be extra savage to survive. So those moments where you're crawling around, distracting people, and then beating the living hell out of them just to get through this terrible post-apocalyptic world. And so I want to see those little things be changed and tweaked. And I'd be shocked to see absolutely none of those systems at least smoothed out in the little bits of improvements that we got in Last of Us Part 2. So to me, I think it's fair to take the raw leaked footage and say, that's definitely what we're getting. And maybe take some grains of salt with the game's exactly the same. I don't believe that's going to be exact. I do believe that Naughty Dog cares about taking that original game and going, well, it was very well reviewed for reasons, so we're just going to leave it generally intact as a preservation of what people loved, but we're going to also have an opportunity to perhaps, in those little moments, make it feel more harrowing, more real. All the technology we have is going to sell that extra little emotional bit, which is harder to really break down until we get side by side. Once we get both campaigns side by side, we see how the AI reacts, we see the speed of animations, all those little things really do matter in a survival game. So I want to see that stuff, but currently what we have is, wow, they've done some really good stuff moving this from PS3 to PS5, and let's not forget, Demon's Souls all blew us away when that launched on PS5, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that one's And that's one, for the most part, it's more or less a pretty good one-to-one translation of the gameplay experience of the original Demon's Souls, just much more polished in a lot of ways. I think, just reading about this, I don't have any pony in that show. I don't know how you say that, but I don't care what ends up happening with this game. I just want people who want to play it, have a good time. And I think, it's usually first experience, like when you see leaked footage, is to just take it with a grain of salt. You're not seeing the full package. You're not seeing it unleashed on your television or your computer monitor right in front of you. You're not seeing the whole thing. So just, relax a bit. Wait till you actually read reviews and gameplay experiences from other people. I know people like the original E3 showing back in the day was a little bit canned, like in regards to how AI acted back then. And then the game came out and had different AI interactions, and that was a slight disappointment for some fans back in the day. And then it got way better in the part 2 on PlayStation 4 and I guess PlayStation 5 too. So I understand slight disappointment off the bat, but just wait until the game comes out is all I have to say. And we'll definitely be covering that one. Imagine it's a John joint. It's probably one of his videos. He does that stuff really well. Any other comments about this, guys?
I look forward to your coverage because there's so many little things that you can only... I can't really, with this leaked stuff, tell exactly what's happening with like ambient occlusion or just all the little touches that I want y'all to slow down and zoom in on. So I'm very excited about that.
It's another strange topic here because the launch of Intel's Arc architecture has just been bizarre. We have some reviews and some previews of various hardware from the Intel Arc launch. Specifically, German outlets have gotten their hands on the A380, Igor's lab. The Germans have the A380 by them, and Igor's lab, computer-based, Golem, and also a number of people on forums have them. And there's also been previews from Gamers Nexus, and Linus also had a kind of interesting video out there at Intel themselves looking at the hardware and some of the driver stack. The initial impressions, though, the really hardcore tech reviews that the Germans did, though, honestly, they do not paint a very pretty picture, even of the low-end A380. But there's a lot of stuff on the table here, and we don't have the card in just yet. I think Will's got one lined up to at least get an A380 at some point soon, because it's not launched in the West yet. But not a awesome first showing, but we are very lucky here. It's because Adam actually has an A380. Adam, what has your experience been so far, and what do you think about this launch?
So, we haven't seen something like this in decades, and I think I want to toe a line between feeling like an Intel apologist or something, but also actually providing the context for people who maybe aren't considering it. I compare the launch of this graphics card to looking at some of the obscure non-x86 CPU launches, like RISC-V, or there's been a bunch of other recent ones, where they have created an entirely new microarchitecture effectively from scratch that doesn't have 30 years of iterative driver updates and game testing and implementation from. And that is exciting in so many ways, but that also causes a lot of the issues that we're seeing in the reviews. And from a gaming side, I honestly haven't tested it a ton. I've only had it a few days. I've been focused on the media, but we've seen the data so far. What we have seen is that Intel has made very sure that all the brand new stuff is implemented very well. Synthetic benchmarks perform well. DirectX 12 seems to run very well within the context of the card's power. But then once we start going back generations, we get worse performance comparatively to other cards. But that's because they're trying to not just bake in the 30 years of legacy bloat that we complain about with modern CPUs, with Windows, with all these other drivers. But that also means that they have to go back and figure out the right solutions for tackling those problems. And that is effectively what they've run into with the launch process, is they could only do so much with the time and resources that they have in the lab to figure all this out. They want to prioritize, however you decide the most important games.
Yeah, right.
There's never going to be a good answer for that. But then they need to just kind of get it. Effectively, anyone buying one now is a beta tester, and they recognize that, and that sucks. but they need the telemetry and the testing results of everyone trying it on these other games to then figure out what they need to do to adapt it from there. So if you were buying into this early, which you can't get them easily right now, so I don't think you are, but if you're buying this early thinking you're getting some crazy next generation graphics card, then you're not going to be super pleased. But for what we're seeing happening, it's very exciting. And with that new microarchitecture, they have a lot of new concepts, including their media engine cores. And it actually has two media engines on it that basically, like with NVIDIA, they had for a while at least, two separate video encode and decode chips. It's effectively like that, but it supports a wide variety of encoding options, including the new AV1 codec, which is an open source codec that Netflix and YouTube and I think Amazon, Apple, like basically everyone is super invested in making a reality, because since it's open source, there's no patents like with H.265, and it's supposed to provide better quality for your bits. And so that's been my angle testing, is testing all of that. And I've already run into some bugs with the few implementations that exist to use this encoder right now, but I had basically quality analysis running overnight. And for stuff that I can't publish yet because I have to rerun it with more granular samples, but for like a first impressions, it is competing with the X264 software encoder, which has like been the bog standard for 20 years, at the very slow preset, which is not possible to run real time, and then going toe-to-toe with NVIDIA's encoder on some also super slow presets that you can't necessarily run. So for video streaming, once it's implemented on Twitch, which originally the estimate was like 2024, it's looking like it's going to be sooner than that now. Quality is going to be really amazing, but it's definitely, once we get into the granularity of how the encoder handles things, there are some trade-offs still compared to certain H.264 implementations. So, but something to go ahead.
Oh, I was going to go on the gamer side of things, because I've been reading through impressions. Ars Technica has not gotten its hands on anything of the sort. So we are truly relying on what's out there in the wild. And you did hit upon it, that stuff that's going right to the metal, all that DX12 stuff, those numbers are at least competing in the same dollar perspective. But boy, when I think about a company that has 20 years of experience disappointing on the graphics driver level, I sure think about Intel, because I've even seen their official company guys come out and be like, yeah, we've been working on integrated graphics for so long. I'm like, maybe you should just say that out loud, because that's not the place where I think of Intel and graphics drivers and stability. And they're really starting from scratch in a sector where some people are coming in just thanks to the nature of a starved chip shortage market, just needing something that's a bump up from a few years ago. And if you're coming into this, I want to say that the US dollar figure starts at 129 for what they're talking about with the A3 series. Boy, you are not getting a match for 4 or 5 years ago cards. You might want to play games that have come out in the past 2, 3, 4 years that have traditionally said, yeah, maybe not DX12. Maybe that's not where we're going to get performance where our current players are. Oh, and it's legacy software, so we're not going to update it and make it work with all this new stuff. So that is a huge market reality if it's you're coming into a first-time market with this. And by the way, the A3 series being the starting point means if you're not looking at raw percentages, if you're just going, hey, how's Intel doing, then you're looking at the lowest end, the cheapest end. You're not seeing the A7 currently in this slew of benchmarks, so it's not looking good. There's no sense that they're going to come out with anything that takes your current games that people have been wanting to play and go, oh yeah, we've been really souping these up. We've really got this together. So that's a bad first showing just in that way of people who don't know what's going on. And then folks like us who do, it's like, wow, Grand Theft Auto 5 benchmarks are looking bad. And that is a solvable problem. That is a huge game that has a massive player base. I feel like someone at Intel should have an email chain that's like, let's maybe look at the top games on Steam and maybe prioritize those 5, 6, 7, 8, even just in China, which is where I believe this has been targeted. And maybe they did that. Maybe all the biggest games that we're not playing here in the West are doing okay. Because I just remember Steam Deck, when that first came out, Valve said to me, we've got the telemetry. We took all of our pre-order customers and we figured out the top 20 games that they're playing, and we made sure those, as much as possible, would work with Proton, would work with Steam Deck, all of those things, we focused on those. And that's the kind of thing, just on a PR and engineering level, when those teams have to come together and be like, we're coming out with something new, that ball appears to have been dropped.
I'm going to take a look at it. I mean, you guys have already talked about very specific aspects of this. I'm going to take a look at it here in my commentary on like a market level aspect, where the last 2 to 2.5 years, almost 3 years at this point, ever since Turing came out, there's been a slight stagnation to a heavy stagnation and then an increase of how much price you're getting, like FPS per US dollar. And usually that historically is not the case because die shrinks and whatever, they make graphics cheaper over time. And we didn't see that. And it just went in the other direction due to the TSMC, chip shortage issues, global crises of all types. That didn't happen. So people were really, really interested, I would say, at the end of last year in Intel getting into this market and coming out with a strong showing and saying, okay, we have a chip maybe at the highest end that is like RTX 3070 level, and it'll be priced competitively, and you'll be wanting to buy this maybe. So there's people wanted market disruption. And unfortunately, due to the delays and the fact that it is launching in a very strange place, China only, this lower end GPU, and then middling driver performance issues, to say the least. Frame time issues, DX11, DX9 performance being very poor. This is not what people probably wanted, like on this like larger holistic level, and it's very disappointing from that level. But maybe we were a little bit too blue-eyed regarding this. It is their first showing in the desktop space in 20 years, and it will obviously have issues. So, I mean, I'm going to still be rather open-minded regarding this. I want to see the chips myself. I want to try out the higher-end chip. I want to see their ray tracing performance. I want to see XeSS. But I also am kind of slightly writing off now the first generation of Arc GPUs as being a curiosity, and then maybe Battle Mage is where they really get their footing.
What I'm noticing is there's all the different ways that they could stand out as a newcomer, as an invested newcomer, because they've said, we're already got at least 2 generations and we're in this for it's, lots of corporations will come and say they're in it for the long haul. And I believe that Intel has the budget and has the manufacturing capacity and the desire to disrupt the space. Much like when Microsoft said, yeah, we're getting into consoles and we're going to lose money for a while and establish ourselves. I think it's really hard to make graphics card buyers be the beta testers when you are not deeply discounting. I think that is the path that you can take. If you're not going to be immediately impressive with XeSS in a bunch of games or ray tracing butt kicking, if you don't have a lot of ways to say, yes, we are absolutely going to make a difference in certain kinds of software immediately, then you've just got to bring that price down. That's it. That's your only path, is take the L on the dollars and cents. And maybe Intel's not in a position to do that for one reason or another. But it just doesn't seem like this generation has that really easy sales pitch, and certainly having this weird synthetic benchmarks in the wild telling the story, that's definitely not what Intel wanted here. Intel wants you to think, we're learning, we're growing, here's what we have so far, and super cheap. Like, I don't see that happening. So that's my big question mark. But again, if they do actually stick it out and really do get to a second and third generation and find those ways to go, yeah, we've got that. What is it, the shorthand for when it's the way it's not smart bridge. I can't remember the phrasing, but they've got something like that.
You're thinking about resizable bar.
Yes, resizable bar. As more systems by default have rebar in the mix, and they can really actually activate that and get that and be like, listen, we're just saving you frames for free just by doing this intelligently. If you can get those out there, if there's like a couple of big free-to-play games that can just truly marry that, and the problem there is how many of those game companies already have nice contract relationships with Intel or AMD, NVIDIA or AMD. So that's its own soupy thing. But ultimately, I think they need to drop those prices right now just to get the news better on their side, because none of us are seeing numbers that make us go, oh yeah, we as super nerds really see the future here. It's like, yeah, we kind of do.
See, I would say, and we have a question actually about this from the Patreon Q&A. We've got Mubar asking, a lot of focus has been on performance, but less about the 75-watt power draw. And while it's disappointing for raw gaming performance, do you think other industries would adopt the card due to lower power consumption and the synthetic benchmarks? Also, they mentioned in one of the Ryan Strout and Tom Peterson have been doing like a mini press tour recently. They mentioned that the lower end cards are basically going to be limited, or they're not going to use the full PCIe. You're looking at PCIe 8X, which sounds like a bad thing, but in terms of flexibility and where you can put it, that is massive, especially if they produce cards that only have the 8X slot. Like, that opens up a lot of flexibility for where it can go. And I would argue that we're kind of looking at a balance of expectations versus what the marketing actually is at the moment, because do they need to lower the price right now if they're not selling it to anyone who cares about lowering the price right now? Because you can't buy one. They're not trying to sell it to you, the American customer, right now. They're releasing it in China with a very limited run, and I would argue that starting with the weakest card was by design, because if they came out swinging with the big $500 card and it can't keep up with these titles, that's worse PR than like, hey, we're starting with our lower one so we can figure out the driver level issues, and that will trickle up to the newer cards. And I think they are playing a really long game where they just have to eat crap in terms of PR just to get the tech done. And once they figure that out, the value of the lower power consumption, the possibility that with that lower power draw, we could get a one slot card, which has been the holy grail of like mini streaming PCs and Plex servers and all these kinds of things, on top of the, otherworldly markets that prefer the lower power draw cards and those kinds of things. I think there is a ton of value in that raw gaming performance doesn't tell, but until they get that performance up, it's kind of null. But again, you can't buy it.
The thing that I saw in some benchmarks out there, the RX 6400 was beating it on a wattage to power ratio, not just slightly either. And so,
right. Yeah. So I think in that case, like what Adam's talking about is like maybe due to its hardware encode and decode capabilities, which are better than what we have on, like, because the RX, those low end RX chips have basically no encode and decode, so that's like the joke. But like I think if there is actually a single slot solution card that is reasonably under 75 watts, like you're talking about, and uses very few PCIe lanes and can do all the hardware encode and decode that you want, it almost like takes the position where you could have this in a PC as a secondary GPU to do things with. That is a level of utility I hadn't thought about before you said it, Adam. So that is actually pretty interesting.
For but in $130, like, I don't think they can get performance out of this card for $130 that would ever compete with what a gamer can buy. You can get a 1080 Ti right now for $200 on eBay. It's used. We're comparing used versus new markets, but that's always going to be the case. And that has always been the case, even kind of with the lower, like, 1030-ish class cards. They're really cheap now, but like at one point...
Yeah, they always get outcompeted by the last gen.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I don't think the gaming performance in raw numbers is ever going to beat that up, but the utility of where these cards can go, I think, has a value on its own that will be separate from the higher end cards once they figure out the numbers. And so, like I said, I think it's a very weird, what are we building expectations on versus what Intel's goals are? And we don't entirely know that. But I can't imagine that they actually expect the A380 to be a big selling gaming performance powerhouse at any point in time, unless they were able to launch it 9 to 18 months ago during the shortage, at which point it would have been gold, but that didn't happen. I don't think they built the card around that idea anyway, given how long this stuff takes. So I don't think they went into this making a shortage, savior card in the first place. So
yeah, good point. Well, any other comments about this?
I mean, this is something for us that's fun to talk about. I will say, just on the criticism front and the tech analysis front, having a new player is fascinating and interesting, and clearly Intel has some positioning to keep on pushing and to get NVIDIA at least itchy, if not scared. I'll take it. I mean, if this speeds up or reduces price on either AMD or NVIDIA's rollouts coming up. That's fun for us. So, and then I really do appreciate Adam's extra insight on that, because I do like the idea of this hitting certain specific use cases, at least in the first run, and then being maybe more of a general market butt kicker later on. So if they can actually pull it off, but now is the time for them to go like, oh, we lost control of what we're telling people about what this is. If so, it's synthetic benchmarks telling a story, as opposed to, hey, this is for some people for now, everyone later.
All right, that's cool. All right, next topic. This one's short and sweet from a headline standpoint. Activision is back on Steam as a publisher. But, you know, I think we're all Steam users here to a certain degree. But I think, Sam, given your kind of position on these things and that you have a greater knowledge of the market conditions than I do, I think you want to say something about this.
Man, this is one of those very brief headlines that has such a giant iceberg beneath it. First off, this is one of the loudest signs yet, and we've seen a couple others, of Microsoft and Activision and Blizzard all basically saying, yeah, this acquisition is definitely happening. Whatever oversight in the United States and other markets is happening, whatever, we're doing this. Because this does not strike me as a Bobby Kotick move at all. There's no way Bobby be like, yeah, we're going to, that BattleNet thing that we spent so much time and energy and advertising on, I mean, this truly is Microsoft's voice saying, okay, if you want to sell games on PC, then we need to be on Steam. So that's one thing there. But there's also this feeling I have of, okay, we're going to maybe finally be able to get big series by default from Activision and even from Blizzard on Steam. Like, goodness, StarCraft on Steam? That's going to be an insane thing where you take something as simple as game you could already play for years, all of a sudden landing on a different launcher and changing the player count, just like by default. The way that happens, just the magic wand that Steam can wave and get users to show up, is always fascinating to me. So there's that aspect. But then let's think about this. Once you're on Steam, you're on Steam Deck. Once you're on Steam, that is officially a fully blown pipeline to Valve going, all right, we're going to have this be a click and install thing for everything we're doing with SteamOS, with Proton, and make that path happen. And the more studios that Microsoft has in its hands, all being on board with this weird thing of going, yeah, you know, we don't really need to be on Windows. We're going to take all those Windows calls and pass them in one way or another through Proton and SteamOS. The more I wonder, how long until we see a showdown? How long until all of these different entities that Microsoft has in its hands say, listen, we like being on Steam, but we sure have a lot of these companies, and it would really be a shame if something happened to all these games. And then Valve goes, well, boy, we still want all that money coming in because we're making that 30% off of all these Microsoft products.
Good point. Yeah.
So what I mean is, when we say Activision is coming to Steam, it feels like there's a lot of emails that go back and forth on both sides of that fence of what weird business showdown will eventually come. But in the meantime, I think it's ultimately good news just to at least have the option, to know that that the Activision family of games will be in more places, more formally, honestly, more stuff on sale by default. Just having stuff on Steam means you're going to see more discounts.
No, it doesn't. Just to be clear, when it comes to their bigger franchises that weren't already on Steam, the greatest discount you can get on a Call of Duty title is $30 5 years after it launches.
I agree with that. However, when we go back to back catalog and all of that other stuff, I mean, honestly, that's one part of it, is them going like, oh, right, hi, we now own you, Activision. We at Microsoft are going to take that IP that we know we can just make money on by default and just dump it for $2, $4, $6 at a time. All I mean to say is that I think there's so much that's possible here that we have to wait and see what plays out. But you are correct. Yeah, Call of Duty is never going to be deeply discounted in that way on Steam.
Let's leave COD out of this for a minute, because like all those, I hate the way they price those titles, but you know, getting things like Wolfenstein 2009 back on there, getting, you know, classic Activision titles which are in a vault in a basement on a floppy, you know, somewhere, you know, like that's things we'd like to see come back to Steam in some capacity in the future. I don't know, Adam, what's your take on this?
I think our next topic is going to relate to what you just mentioned about pulling titles out of the vault. But I also think this is, in a way, going to be motivated by the launch of Warzone 2 in the fall, in that Apex Legends moved over to Steam already. EA already bit the bullet, said you can play your Origin games on Steam, and that's playable. That was one of the first easy anti-cheat games playable on Steam Deck, and Warzone 2 is launching, and they need those players, as Sam was mentioning. Like, they want those players on Steam Deck ready to go, and I think that is a big motivator for this, because Activision already was picking and choosing where they released their PC titles. The Crash Bandicoot remasters were already on Steam. Tony Hawk released through Epic Game Store, because I'm sure they got money, for that deal. Like, they were picking and choosing where they could make the most money already, not just throwing everything on Battle.net. It would be different if they were like EA, where everything was on Battle.net. But they were just arbitrarily throwing games at different launchers based on where they could make the most money, with Warzone being their biggest money cow that they've absorbed all these other studios into. I think they wanted to not miss out on Steam Deck and the Steam player base this time around. And Microsoft definitely had influence there, but I think those dollar signs were adding up. But we, as gamers, we get to benefit with our next title, or with our next topic, with the unvaulting of new games.
Yeah,
or old games.
Let's move on to that. This one's tangentially related, and essentially through the PC Insider program, Xbox PC Insider, Microsoft PC Insider, I don't know what they actually call it officially, you can try and download for yourself right now, if you sign up for it, a variety of classic Activision first-person shooter titles. Primarily, there's Hexen, Heretic, Wolf 3D, Quake 4, not Enemy Territory, Quake Wars, but RTCW, whatever it's called. And then, and then a couple other titles in there too that I'm forgetting off the top of my head right now. And I'm gonna actually lead the charge on this one because I've played them all for the most part. And it's an interesting collection there. They are releasing them through the Microsoft Store.
Remember, they're free right now.
They're free for now. Yeah, so you can try them out now. And, I don't know how long you'll get to keep them, but for some of them, there's like WAD files that you can maybe keep, for example. But most of these are, a lot of them are actually classic titles that do not run necessarily under modern Windows because they launched on DOS, the precursor system to Microsoft, like Windows later kernels and things like that. And so that kind of puts a different perspective on these collection of games that are out now for free that you can try out, where the ones that are on DOS are, interestingly, DOSBox products. That says they are running an emulator of DOS that launches on your PC and then plays the games, and you play your games through that, and they emulate old hardware, things like Sound Blaster cards and AdLib. And I tried out here Hexen and Heretic, as well as Wolf 3D, and I'll talk about Wolfenstein 3D right now, and that is actually probably the most competent I've tried out so far, where it looks and sounds for the most part like the original package, and it even does some good things like it upscales using nearest neighbor scaling, integer scaling, up to your display. I was playing it at 4K, and it looked really crisp, as you're seeing in this footage right here. There were some slight performance issues that I think are DOSBox related, or maybe how they packaged the game, because it's hard to imagine this running poorly at all these days. And maybe there was a bit of sound crackle that should not be there, but generally pretty great. Hexen and Heretic are ones that I was a little bit more disappointed with when trying these out. Looking at footage of Hexen here, where I feel like this is a game that really you should not be just like bilinear upscaling. It's 320 by 200 resolution or whatever. There's a lot of things. One, it's running at 35 tick rate in a 60 hertz container. It's bilinear upscaled, so it's just like super muddy looking. And I don't think the sound was very authentic in a number of ways. And there was a couple of points where the performance actually dipped, like a stutter, which didn't make any sense. Maybe it's DOSBox issues, I don't know. But the other thing that I tried out, as well as part of this package of stuff here, was Quake 4, and footage you're seeing on screen right now. Quake 4 is a weird game. I don't know if I like it or not, but I played a lot of it in my life. And this is where you can see that these are really raw, just like we exported this for the GDK environment. This is literally the version of the game that you can play on GOG and or Steam, and it comes with all the baggage that has, where the GOG and Steam release with the last patch that came out, they run with a weird tick rate where it runs at like 59 FPS internally, and it doubles a frame every frame, kind of like Mario Kart back in the day. And it looks really terrible. Like, I'm moving side to side here, and if you can see this footage, you probably think it looks terrible too. And it has all these other issues that you can read about on the PC Gaming Wiki, but it's basically launching with that older version. They haven't really touched these in a way. They didn't ship them with like auto config files that fix these issues up. So that's a bit of a shame. But in general, I'm very happy that people can play these games again to a certain degree, and they're coming out again. And I hope also we see other releases of these in the future, not just DOSBox iterations. It's really curious to see that Microsoft is using DOSBox, though.
Yeah, that's the thing that's weird to me is them. I mean, I will take this. I feel like someone said, oh my God, can we please take these Hexen and Heretic, these RPG-infused shooters from the olden days and get them back out? And somebody said, okay, maybe the cheapest path available. You are only one person and you get 7 hours to code it. Go. And they're like, okay, DOSBox on the Insider Hub, I guess. But, you know, owning Bethesda and then soon owning Activision, just on a licensing level, Hexen and Heretic are weird series because id, I believe, published them back in the day only to have Activision swoop in and acquire Raven Software and acquire the future. I don't know if it's the publishing or just the licensing, but there's a thing where Activision has its stake into some of it. So you could still go on Steam, get those Hexen and Heretic games, and they said id Software and Raven on them, didn't say Activision. But they didn't get included when the big Bethesda acquisition happened. At no point did Microsoft go, yeah, I mean, we've got Hexen and Heretic and it's all completely cinched up. So I don't know if this is a bit of a fallout of them like going, okay, we finally lawyered up and got our T's and I's together. And this is that mild tease that we're going back to that Hexen Heretic kind of world. Or and then Quake 4 is just one of those weird things of like, God, I would like for them to do something nicer with that. Because on the console side, they shut down backwards compatibility advancement. The Microsoft has said pretty loudly, yeah, that's done. We're not adding more stuff. And nobody's really come out and said, oh, right, now that we own Activision, that's going to change. They've yet to really come out and say that. And right now, Quake 4 is one of the bigger sore spots on that front, because that would be lovely to see running on a Series X, let alone clean up the PC code. So seeing it get dumped in this really awkward way with absolutely no help or guidance to make it run smoothly. I mean, I did what you did and just grabbed Quake 4 from the Insider Hub and installed them. Like, I immediately said, someone give me an FAQ so I can make this run not crappily. I don't know what's going on here. And it bummed me out. So I'm glad it's there. I'm glad it's them saying it exists and you can play it. But like, could you just get one more intern on this or something, guys?
Yeah. It's literally shipping an auto exec with it to fix the issue. It's kind of funny that it didn't happen. Adam, what do you think about this?
I'm excited for this if it means that this is what they're trying to do to push backwards compatibility. Like, is this them testing it on PC before they get DOSBox running on the Xbox, and that's how they're going to do it now? Are we going to get some crazy, DOS Windows 98 game pack for Games Pass on Xbox? Like, that would be cool. Obviously, they have fixes they need to do, but like, if this is the start of that, that's cool. Otherwise, it's kind of weird, because like with Elder Scrolls Arena thrown in there, that's free on Steam already. Like, you can get that anywhere. And as you mentioned with the WADs, like, once you have it, you kind of always own it now.
Yeah, and you'd rather play it in a source port. Like, you can drop these into GZ
right.
Doom, and it'll run and look much better. And
right,
all these
and
things.
So my hope is that, my naive hope is that this is them testing the waters as they're working with DOSBox to get, because the platforms are similar enough to get DOSBox running on Xbox Series S and X, in which case that opens the door wide open for some stuff. But as it stands, it's just like, this is cool, but it's not how I would choose to play the games, especially with big old box monitors behind
It's
me.
very easy to grab those WADs, as Alex said. Like, that's the best, the best thing about this is you've just been given
thanks for the game.
a license to not feel bad about grabbing a WAD file.
No, that's a good thing. Okay, so let's move on to something, once again, tangentially rated. I'm just going to move right into this. There's no stopping me. Romero Games, Brenda and John Romero's studio, who've worked on a number of titles that are not FPS related, are actually just announced that they're hiring for a new FPS game, apparently with a major publisher, and based upon the kind of wording of the FAQ they released, and I believe also, a tweet, that essentially this looks to be using Unreal Engine 5. I'm excited. I think John Romero is a genius when it comes to FPS design. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, I'm here with a John Romero shirt. that has a curse word on it, because if you go to his website and buy merch, it will you can ask John to sign things. And I said, well, let's see if he actually reads this, and he did. The thing that stands out to me is that we're working with a publisher. He's based in Ireland. He's been in Galway for years. So I just immediately assume, and I have no knowledge as to why this would be, I just like to think that maybe Embracer is just wanted more content to swallow up. Like, this feels like an obvious Embracer grab on an IP/developer level. Like, it just fits with all the other like gazillions of legacy IP and things that they have. But beyond that, it's been a while since John Romero has tried helming a first-person shooter team, and we all know what happened the last long time ago. He did that, as opposed to when he's just said, you know what, I'm going to take my beloved old Doom and Doom 2 ecosystems and put out some maps on those. Those maps are fantastic. The man continues to know how to get that moment-to-moment dance around of monster closets and secrets and all that stuff. He knows how to do that stuff, but running and leading a team to make a modern first-person shooter game, I want to see him give it a shot. I would love for it to be good, but I'm withholding my excitement about him as a producer.
Adam.
I had to go grab. I had him sign Dangerous Dave as well from his.
Oh yeah, the new Dangerous Dave release. Yeah.
But yeah, I'm in a similar place where, like, theoretically we could see some new genius, but this could also just be like him just wanting to be attached to some games again, and we could, it's theoretically within the realm of possibility that we get a game where we don't feel like there's any Romero in its DNA. And so it's hard to judge, but I remain cautiously optimistic because the possibilities are huge. But as you mentioned, he has seemingly had his best results just making new WADs for us. And so,
this is apparently a new IP that has nothing to do with running stuff like through old WADs and whatnot. The reason why I'm excited is because, I'm a little bit of an optimist when it comes to these kind of things for no good reason. Daikatana, for all of its faults, has some pretty cool art design on some levels, some interesting weapons. The first episode is absolutely rubbish. But there's some good stuff in there. And I think maybe based upon some commentary over the last couple of years of games that have inspired John most recently, it could actually be like a passion project that we're seeing here. I'm going to hope it's going to be that. The man tends to know what he's doing, and he's just a generally really, really likable guy. He's really humble and always really good at correcting Sandy Peterson, which I always get a good laugh about. I think that's really what we all have to say about that. There's not too much to talk about. It's just announced. So let's move on to our next topic. Last topic of the evening, another strange one. Maybe it's positive news, depending upon how you view this story. A Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2, the sequel to the seminal cult classic that released around Half-Life 2 time on the Source engine, is kind of buggy, janky. Well, that game kind of disappeared for a while, and it was kind of canned, maybe. And, well, they've just announced recently that development has resumed again, presumably at a different developer. And I don't know. I saw some footage of this game back in the day in 2019 at Gamescom of it running on RTX GPUs with like ray tracing. I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then they showed off some gameplay, and then it just completely died. So I haven't been happy or excited at all since. And I don't actually know how to view this news at all. What do you think there, Sam?
The way I view this news is, I have heard rumblings, because I'm in Seattle, which is where a lot of the work on Bloodlines 2 was done initially. The things I've heard, I can't say. I'm just not in a position, because there's so much vampiric, icky blood covered over every single thing that project had. But ultimately, what I have been led to believe is that everything we've seen is gone. There is a chance that the visual content that we've seen might have been salvaged, assets, animations, engine. That's possible. But the actual real core of it, the team that put things together, the narrative stuff, the chaining plot stuff together, if any of it's been salvaged, I'd be amazed. And that would, in my opinion, be such a core reason that you're not playing this because you want ray tracing. You're playing this because this series takes this compelling alternate universe somewhere where choice matters and where really caring about the characters matters. Like that's what this series could potentially do. That's all gone. Gone. So if they have it in good hands, what does that mean? I would love to see it. If the good hands means, well, it's going to look really cool and the blood effects are going to be awesome. Okay, fine. That could still be interesting. But I think people really need to completely tear down their expectations. I believe the pre-orders were canceled a gazillion years ago, which is probably the way to do it, which is sort of like as formal a way to say this ain't the same game as you're going to get. But it's going to be a fascinating story whenever the parties involved feel free to talk about it, I think is the safest thing I can say.
Yeah. Adam?
I got nothing.
That's okay. We don't always have to say something. That's the great thing about DF Direct. We're an inclusive show. You don't have to say something. So that's the end of our news topics this week. Let's move on to our content, and then after that, Q&A section. DF content discussion this week is a bit light because I'm working on things that don't actually have a good discussion point, but we are thankfully, it's American Hot Boy Summer here on Digital Foundry. Sam, you've been playing a lot of games lately.
Every time you say Hot Boy Summer, I just want to put on my shade so everyone can see all. That's reflection. It's hard to be cool when you're like, oh, look at all of those spreadsheet notes reflecting from the but yes.
Ray Trace Excel.
Yes, this week was surprisingly packed for interesting, I don't want to say small, but interesting games. The biggest, in our opinion, I would say is Stray, because I think we all talked about it. In fact, by the time this goes live, I know Digital Foundry's own coverage of its technical every direction, all the consoles, and its PC stuttering will have been covered. But in addition, there's a few things that I've already gotten my hands on. Multiverses is a free-to-play Smash Bros. Clone that is helmed by Warner Brothers. It had a closed alpha earlier this year. But the shortest thing I can say about that is it's now mostly in open beta because it's not hard to just turn on Twitch and get into it. And it's instantly free to play as far as you want to play something that feels like Smash Bros. It's a platform brawler where you're trying to knock people off to get a KO. The big hook of this game is that it's all about co-op 2v2, where everybody has at least some ability so that you can help your other bouncing around the platform fighting friend. Wonder Woman has a like the lasso of truth and a shield. There's a brand new weird dog dragon thing that can completely lasso friends off when they're about to jump off, so they can do melee styled attacking on the edge of a platform and jumping in midair and all that wackiness. And it's not that interesting from a technical standpoint beyond running very, very well on the computer I've been testing on. But mostly I'm impressed that you can play mostly for entirely free right now. The economy seems to give you that easy entry point of going, I've got a few characters for completely free. If I grind for a bit, I can unlock a couple more. And if I spend $5, I can unlock more after that. And I think $5 to like sufficiently play a little bit of a fighting game is nice when it doesn't feel like it's completely just trying to be a whale and make you spend a bunch of money on cosmetics and costumes. So that is totally there. There's already a $100 Founders Pack, which seems to be designed to let you unlock all of the characters as the game lives on, like 30 characters. There's currently, I want to say 12. But all I mean to say is that as a free-to-play cross-platform game, I think that's going to be interesting on a networking level, because in the opening day, the servers that were handling all of the cross-platform stuff were really struggling. So if you keep it locked to your own platform, then all of the promises of rollback netcode and smooth net play seem to be working. But if you want to be on PlayStation and play against a bunch of randos on Xbox, that might be an issue. But this is early days, and I think that's going to be an interesting thing to break down that's less frame rate and more networking. So I'm looking forward to that. There's also As Dusk Falls, which came out on Game Pass, on Xbox, on PC, and it's from some folks who had been at Quantic Dream, left that studio, started their own narrative-focused thing, And as a freebie, but if you're paying already for Game Pass, I think it's a solid thing to try out. It starts slow, and it is all narrative. It is all about hanging back and waiting for the dialogue to end so you can insert a choice or occasionally a quick time event. There are a lot of people who this is not going to be their ideal game. But it also wants to be a co-op narrative game where you and friends can have a smartphone out and use the smartphone to each vote on the choices that you make. Or the quick time events, like randomly one person's phone will vibrate or make a notification and you'll have that choice. There are some critics out there who really like it. I'm a little mixed on it because there's no wrong narrative decision. Whatever you do, the story keeps going. So it's like, oh, I failed a QTE, but it keeps on going. So where's the tension there? Like, if I can, like that to me is a weird thing where it's like...
That's kind of like the Quantic Dream thing, right? Like with Ethan running through the shopping mall and like hitting chickens and stuff like that. Like it's like very similar to that. I mean, I can see why that's compelling. I haven't played a strictly narrative game in quite some time. So I can see why it is compelling, but it really is about the story at that point.
Love for it'd be almost a funny Digital Foundry analysis because it mixes real-time 3D with these frozen, pre-drawn portraits that are moving. They're maybe one frame every 5 seconds, where it's like a bold, specifically drawn keyframe that's then moved to the next new. So it's kind of like a moving comic book inside of a 3D container. So on a technical level, I didn't see it like stuttering or being disgusting. It actually feels a little flat in terms of how the 3D, you'd think like, okay, you've got extra 3D budget to work with. You could maybe just really pre-bake some cool, seemingly real effects because it's set in like a weird, almost Vegas desert environment. So that's like, I think it's an interesting freebie for sure, but like you want to head in cautiously just because I think the narrative stuff is mixed. And it's also, I'm playing it in English. It's made by French people. Their voice director was from some other country running the English cast is what it sounds like. So you've got some of that stilted stuff. Maybe it sounds better in different languages. I don't know. And then the other thing, Hot Wheels is now inside of Forza. Forza Horizon 5 has its first DLC pack, and the Hot Wheels kit to me I thought was a weird choice because we just got Hot Wheels Unleashed last year, multi-platform, as a dedicated, pretty decent racing game with its own technical triumphs and shortcomings. But inside of Forza Horizon 5, I think the trailer kind of failed to make this clear, that you've got this mix of Hot Wheels orange and blue plastic tracks that kind of zip around and do the zippity-doo all over. That's the official technical term, zippity-doo. And then that's all mixed in with all of the classic Forza Horizon terrain. So you're going through like rainy, muddy, snowy stuff. Then you're zipping through the plastic tracks, then back to the terrain and the jumps and the boundingness. And so I want to say like everything inside of the Horizon 5 engine seems to be identical. So whatever you thought of the performance on your PC or your favorite Xbox console, you're going to get here. But just in terms of what it adds to the sense of why am I getting an expansion pack, I think there's something there. I think it's mixing up that driving in interesting ways. So again, there's another Game Pass freebie. That's easy to recommend. Wait, no, I take it back. You got to pay for that one. That's how they get you. You get Horizon 5 for free, but you got to pay for that DLC. I don't think it's an immediate slam dunk purchase, but I do think anyone who's like, oh, I want to mix up my Horizon 5 gameplay, and I'm especially people who I guess play Horizon 5 that often every week.
All the time.
There you go. So that's Sam's playing a bunch of games. Wacky Corner. Hey.
Okay, let's move on to our supporter Q&A section. Time for that supporter Q&A section where our Patreon backers are able, through Discord and other channels, able to pose us some questions. And today, since we announced ahead of the time that Sam and Adam would be here, people really asked some awesome questions directed at them. And let's start with the first one that kind of targets all of us, I would say, from Leftist Hominid, classic name. The Xbox Series S has great consumer value as a backwards compatibility device. It maintains Xbox One X enhancements, albeit at lower resolution for original Xbox and Xbox 360 games, and it runs non-Xbox One X enhanced Xbox One games, that is a mouthful, my goodness, with basically perfect performance. However, one major Achilles heel the Xbox Series S has is that there are many Xbox One games with Xbox One X enhancements that are not optimized for Series X and S and are stuck in those 1S modes on Series S. So, which very often means 900p 30. With backwards compatibility and FPS boost initiatives now being sunset, they're not being done anymore. I was wondering, do you think Microsoft would put an initiative forward to sort of sort out those Series S games that could run Xbox One X code without issue, and then maybe make external tweaks without modifying the game code? For example, it's kind of weird, unless there's developer intervention, yada, 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 yada. Do you, like, it's a really long question left to Thomas, but the question is, will they do this? Do you think they'll do this? I don't know, you guys.
No. And the reason I say that is because they had all the opportunity in the world to take Series S and get that proposition out to people of, oh my goodness, this perfectly reasonably priced new console is really there for all of this stuff. But no, because it's not targeting 4K at all, that takes away some of the 1X stuff that's mentioned in this post. So that's one reason. And I think another is that Microsoft has priorities here, and their priority, I think, going forward is about Xbox as a service, is about getting you on streaming and getting you on new software and getting you on things that are optimized for however you're going to play going forward. I just don't see them investing in this. I would love to be proven wrong, but I think just because we're talking essentially about I don't want to say emulation, that's not the right word, but essentially they knew from the get-go there's a sort of ceiling. And they could get some of those tweaks going, but I have to imagine that it's not an across-the-board thing. It's game by game by game. And I just don't see Microsoft structurally saying, yep, we're putting some engineers on that. That's a priority. Getting this little use case of slightly higher resolutions and slightly higher frame rates on One S. I think that they're happy having that divide there to some extent. Not excited, but I think they're like, yeah, that's fine. That's the cost of business.
I think they would at some point, but from what I have gleaned, it seems like their whatever team was handling like the backwards compats and the enhancements and stuff was fairly small and often put on other things, because they already announced we're not getting any more direct backwards compatibility things, as we talked about with the DOSBox stuff possibly maybe being a direction. But like, I think that they very clearly did a generalized policy of S does not get the Xbox One X enhancements, because I believe it was the memory bandwidth differences that made it for the higher end games not be impossible. But it is still possible on something like Sonic Mania to run theoretically those older versions. I think it's something that if they do it, it'll be totally random and at just some like lull point where the engineers had the time for it. Because I would argue like they had no cost justification to do that for, say, the Xbox 360 Halo titles. When they were pushing Master Chief Collection, a new game they spent all this money on to sell, why did they dedicate engineering time to upconverting a version of the game that people would, already have? Like, I think the priorities are definitely there, but I don't think they're universal rules, because they've already kind of undercut those at different points. I don't think you can guarantee, you won't be able to be like, one day I'll get to do it, but maybe it'll show up at random.
Yeah, I think case by case is not going to happen. Anything that they can do system wide that doesn't break things, that doesn't create an entire QA nightmare, like Sonic Mania is a great example of, they could almost certainly technically do it, but that's breaking out a single game in a way that just doesn't make sense, the same way that Auto HDR does. Because Auto HDR is this color container. Every single game has that in common. Focus on that. We get gains. Yeah. So that would be the only way, is if someone says, you know what, let's do it system-wide.
Imagine a scenario that maybe is also more realistic, where they would do one game. I just imagined was some sort of like partnership for a new game release. Like, for example, there's another release of, I don't know, Cuphead, a new Cuphead game or something like that, and they want to bring out that old Xbox One X version or something like that, and they want to let you buy the old game in some way that is enhanced versus what it is now. I don't know if they do that, kind of like how they did with like Dishonored 2 and Deathloop. I don't know. We'll see what happens when Deathloop releases. Maybe when Deathloop releases on Xbox, there'll be something interesting happening there. But let's move on to our next question here from Stefan von der Krone. As Stugger Struggle continues with new titles, I wonder why it is such a problem. Oh my God, this is a long answer. We know that the console versions don't have these problems, as they have precompiled shaders embedded in their assets. This is possible due to the fixed console hardware. So somehow these shaders must be compiled ahead of distribution. Yes. That means they should be available ahead of time on PC as well. Maybe. We'll talk about this. So the compilation then should be easily done as a startup or level load. Yes. Why risk severe FPS drops if you can compile the shaders ahead of time? Now, I've been working on this video in the background for a while, always gathering information, and it will actually come out, I swear. I just won't say this every week. But the idea that you have there that it always necessarily doesn't happen on console is maybe not actually true. Because technically games these days, one kind of wrench that's thrown in everything you're saying here, Stefan, which I would say like 90% of everything you're saying is true, is that there's actually a lot of dynamic content in games these days where players can just like randomly, they have some gun and they have like a paint ability in a game to skin their weapon in whatever way they want. It could be a purple, dazzling something. And now this shader is not necessarily compiled ahead of time because it may be the issue of downloading the game with all these files. They don't want to be constantly transferring all these shaders all the time and things like that. So they may actually not have all these things compiled because there's so much dynamic game content out there. They may not even know one of the combinations you could do. This is actually technically possible with open world games with weird meta elements and things like that. So you could actually technically get a shader compilation stutter on a console. I almost want to feel like we should say, try out Fortnite on console for a long time and look at it over like hundreds of hours of play. And maybe you'd actually see this happening occasionally. Because that is just a game with so much stupid amounts of content. But on the PC side of things, that is another, like this, the fact that there could be random dynamic content that users are creating and it could just round the corner in 1 second and you'd have to compile it in that moment because there's just no way that you would always ever know whatever shader is. That's the thing that happens there too. But the bigger issue is actually the reason why stutter struggle is such a big deal, I think, is because there's just not enough sometimes knowledge and or prescience about what makes a quality release. And this is something that developers should really look out for because I think it is a huge quality issue of releases. And I think that's like the biggest blockade at the moment. We've already seen developers, even with really beautiful games, have shipped games that don't have shader compilation stutter. And we've also seen indie developers ship games without shader compilation stutter. So it is possible, but I feel like there's a knowledge gap and or a priority gap at times, like a lot of things.
That's first off, purple dazzling whatever. I think this should be your weapon of choice to battle the stutter. Yeah. Absolutely, I can't tell you how many folks when in my review of Stray, where I came out and said, I didn't run the full video analysis, but it was clear as day. I'm on a 3080 Ti and I'm getting those little stutters throughout this very dense narrative-driven adventure where everything is kind of linear and you're encountering new content inside of Stray a lot of the time. So it keeps on happening a little bit. And so many comments said, I don't know, I didn't notice it. And I think there are a lot of people who don't, for whatever reason, notice these frame rate things, don't notice I know people who don't know the difference between 30 and 60 FPS. They exist. Like, yeah. That's not clearly anyone who has chosen to watch a Digital Foundry Direct is not in any way understanding of that point. But like that happens where you on a small team, the QA log is like, certain things are known and we just don't care, or it's not going to affect people. I do wonder in QA testing how many people just forget to wipe their entire system and start from scratch, like depending on the testing environment, where it's like, I have to imagine a company like Microsoft has that happen all the time. You need to be ready for a new installation after things change. Things can happen in an entirely new build, and maybe smaller QA departments just go, yeah, that wasn't our priority because we're just trying to get this done because we're
trying to get the bugs out, the blockers, try and get those out of the way. I understand that there's like a priority for Q&A here, but I do kind of want to say that in Stray, I think it's not as bad as I've seen in other titles. I did load it up for about 10 minutes and it's in the Stray video that Tom put out. I noticed that some of them were shader compilation stutters because I ran the same sequence twice, but there were others that might have been from other issues because Unreal Engine 4 historically, depending upon how things are managed, and definitely indie studios will not have the easiest time taking care of this. There can be just literally on PC, just like it loads a new area and it stutters. It shouldn't be that way considering the insane amounts of RAM and VRAM and processor speeds we have on PC, but it can actually happen. I don't know. What's your opinion on the stutter struggle, Adam? Because I've been talking about it on Twitter all the time, and I've seen you liking and retweeting some of my stutter struggle. Like, what is your opinion on it?
I'm not as informed into the background processes with it, but I do think a lot of games, like, I think their priorities, as Sam mentioned, are on getting the game out and getting a basic user experience down, because I don't think for a lot of games your average gamer is going to be too excited to have an experience like with the Call of Duty titles and Warzone to wait like 20 minutes for shaders to install when you already waited however long for the game to download and then to update within the game, and like, you know, to have those, okay, you have to wait for and obviously you can still play, but it's a drastic experience that I don't think a lot of publishers or developers necessarily want to add that friction layer. And if you can do it more invisibly, that's great, but there are games that do that where it's a really bad time still for the first one. And one that my buddy keeps bringing up is if you install Battlefield 5 with fresh GPU drivers and you haven't pre-installed the shaders, that thing runs terribly, even though the game itself runs amazingly once you've done that. But I think it's just a priority of like, do we want the player to just jump into the game, or do we want them to have like a 3-stage installation process? And I don't know, with the combination of settings and hardware and everything, that it's really that possible to pre-compile like every shader option to send to downloads like it was being suggested. That doesn't feel realistic to me.
That's where Steam Deck wins out in that funny way of Valve knowing about this, Valve understanding the issue and going, well, we do have the console experience there. Like, my Steam Deck is constantly checking for shader compilation updates. It constantly does this, by the way. So if you don't like seeing your system have to update all the time, Steam Deck may annoy you to some extent, because it is really, truly doing it a lot.
It's constantly updating. And even they're releasing like a new beta firmware, like it feels like every other day. So yeah, that's an interesting experience. My video, it's going to be long, and it's going to talk about actually a lot of these holistic questions of like waiting versus asynchronously compiling and pre-compiling. It's going to really go into all of this, and as well as the root cause, which is something I've basically never talked about at DF. There's a reason why this happens, actually, but it's like almost political at this point. So let's move on to the next question. This one from Eric Benoit. I've been playing Xbox for about 2 years after coming out as multi-platform. I don't know what that means, that sentence necessarily. Sorry, Eric. But I really like my Xbox One X and my Series X. My question is, I don't really want to spend the money on extra storage for the Series X. So I've been delegating storage to my Xbox One X. Are there certain games that are best left on One X, such as Xbox 360 titles? Well, once again, I don't have a lot of console experience here, so I'm going to defer to you here, Sam and Adam, who maybe have some more.
I have not definitively tested this, so there absolutely could be outliers. There could be a wacky thing where One X, because of that backwards compatibility program being built originally on it, could have slightly better performance, but I've not seen it. I have certainly didn't see it in the original testing of Series X when I got that in my hands. The idea being, if you can just have separate gaming rooms and you've got your One X in one room and the Series X in the other, and you like that, sure. But as far as I've seen, I've been happy. I actually have a little mount on my Series X where I put my little SSD drives that I plug in via USB just to have extra storage, because just taking solid state drives, plugging them via USB 3.1, you get all of the extra loading speed that you don't get on Series X. Like, you just get an across the board loading speed increase on all of that software. Even if it's minor in certain cases, you still get that. So ultimately, if you're about performance, get extra SSD drives, slap them on your Series X, and take your One X stuff and move it there. If you're happy having boxes in separate rooms, just keep it as it is. the cost of those proprietary drives. You only need the proprietary drive to store brand new Series X hardware. Sadly, those drives for Xbox are not coming down. Originally, it was like, how the heck do you add extra storage to PS5? Oh my goodness, when are they going to roll out M2 support? Man, Xbox has the great idea with these little cards that work. And now it's reached exactly what I expected, which is that M2 prices are coming down, and Xbox and Seagate are just going like, we're going to still charge $220 for a terabyte, which is just a bummer.
Yeah, it's the same thing on PlayStation. You can run all your PS4 and PS4 Pro games from a USB SSD and still run it better than speed-wise than it ran from the PlayStation 4's internal hard drive, and offload your storage that way. There's not going to really be any games that run better on the One X versus the Series X, but there's plenty of games that won't necessarily run any better on the Series X than the One X if you wanted to divide it that way. With the 2 terabyte drive, you can almost buy an entire extra Series X console for the same price. So it's kind of, I've known someone that did that. That's kind of ridiculous, but like that's how they're priced at the moment. But no, I would 100%. You can get a 2 terabyte external SSD for way cheaper than anything else, and that would be where I started moving for my games, because that's basically how I migrated everything on my PS5. I've got the internal M.2 for all my PS5 games, but then I've got the USB for PS4, and it runs really well.
Yeah, so there's a question here that I'm just going to tack on here from CTG X67. It's talking about this memory card situation here. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but the question is at the end, do you think Microsoft will make good of its initial promises soon, as in there will be more avenues for memory cards? Or should we expect to be stuck with Seagate's monopoly for the foreseeable future? What do you guys think about that?
Microsoft's silence this many years after the Series X launch, to me, is not good. They've had all kinds of opportunity to even begin to communicate about it. In my opinion, in this sort of case, when they announce a feature and then go silent, no news is bad news. That does not mean that they've got something great in the works. They don't have any pro-consumer awesome thing to announce. My guess is whatever supply chain thing that would have moved more of these proprietary cards in, maybe because a specific partner had a production line just crap out, then that's that. So they could eventually, but right now I am super pessimistic, and I'm really not abreast on the whole hacking your own card thing.
Oh, I've been following that a bit. I think you have too as well, Adam, right?
This is a philosophical policy problem that Xbox has had since the 360, and arguably even the original Xbox, in that the Xbox 360 hard drives were still just SATA hard drives in an enclosure. But unlike the PS3, where you could flip off the little thing, pull it out, I have a 2 terabyte SSD in my PS3. It just formats it and you're good. You had to go through all these crazy steps to flash firmware onto it or have a hardware modded Xbox 360. Same thing here, I think, in that they don't want you to do that. Be it because it was so easy to mod the original Xbox that they just outright want to avoid that at all costs, or whatever. They have always been strongly against, even though it's still external storage, but like that more OS interactive layer storage being user upgradable to a fault. And I agree. I imagine that they were probably working with another manufacturer at some point, because the Seagate ones even went on clearance at one point because no one was buying them. And then they went off of clearance, that whatever fell through, and they just don't have anything there. There are some third-party adapters you can get. There's some that's more legit than others, and then there's some on AliExpress, which are very not trustworthy, which just adapt it to the same kind of SSD that's in the Steam Deck, the little 2230 M.2 SSD. But you have to have, again, the right firmware and the right controller module on board, and even then, it just like disconnects a whole bunch. Like I've seen videos of people trying it, and they get like this close to where it says that it works, but then you can't run an app from it. I don't see that improving anytime soon, because as Steam Deck owners have found, getting upgraded storage even for that is a problem in terms of speed and capacity. And I don't think Xbox is willing to just let you stick an entire M.2 drive out the back of your console and risk that breaking off and all of the liability with that. So I don't know what their solution is going to be. I'm honestly imagining an almost like a breakout box where they have the little connector that plugs in the back, and then it has a cable that runs to a full M.2 expansion drive, and that's going to be, if they ever allow anything, that's going to be the future. But I completely agree that their silence means they're happy to not worry about it, and they're going to avoid answering questions about it as long as possible, because they've kind of always limited, like they
The
very
HDD
much
stuff.
benefited from selling you their upgraded hard drives and not questioning, anything else.
All right, so next question here, less me because I don't have much experience here always, honestly, from Stephen Hall. How does the DF crew find the HDR experience in Windows gaming? I'm thinking about upgrading to an HDR display for my PC, thanks. Well, I honestly don't actually have much HDR experience because for so many of my videos, we have to capture everything in SDR because YouTube HDR is completely unreliable. We cannot, upload LUTs, their LUTs, to get it into a nice SDR that looks actually like the game would look. We just can't really record in HDR, honestly. So I don't spend a lot of my time playing in HDR as a result, so I don't have enough experience, but I'm pretty sure you two both do.
Well, I could say on my primary rig, I upgraded to Windows 11. And Windows 11, I don't know if that is the secret sauce, but there's a system-wide HDR toggle that did not do right by me on Windows 10. That's working so far pretty well on Windows 11. And my favorite thing about it is that I can grab screens that still are in an SDR container. So if I tap the normal Windows screenshot thing, it knows that I want to probably share it outside of an HDR container with normal human beings on normal web browsers. So that's just nice from my purposes. But ultimately, HDR on Windows has more weird edge cases and outliers. I don't ever recommend it 100%. There's always, at some point, some sort of issue because of that standard being wonky compared to it just works, in my opinion, for the most part, on Series X and on PlayStation 5. But it's better than it was. I don't run into things where things are blown out or where there's occasions where sometimes maybe borderless full screen will show the color differently. I'll change that to full screen or vice versa. I can't remember which is which, but sometimes that's like the one thing I'll run into where like that doesn't look right and I hit the thing and it works. But definitely sucks on Windows 10. Like there too many times where it bugged out on that I didn't even realize when I switched to Windows 11. I'm like, oh, I haven't run into that headache in a while. Oh, because I have my PC plugged into my OLED, which I love. I love doing it that way.
Yeah, I was in a similar boat where anytime I tried HDR on Windows 10, it was just so bad that I basically just kind of was like, well, I'm never going to look at HDR again. And frankly, on most LCD monitors, the HDR experience is terrible anyway. But recently I've been testing the new QD OLED ultrawide from Alienware.
Yes,
and
I saw that.
That is the best computer monitor that may ever exist for a long time. It is so stellar, and naturally I want to use HDR on it, and I've just been blown away that normal, just even desktop use HDR on Windows 11 is rock solid, and then auto HDR is the coolest thing in the world. Like, seeing all these games that don't have any HDR toggles in the menu just look like they were built for it is really freaking cool. It is a really clutch feature. The only thing I've run into is certain games, like I've been playing a lot of Battlefield 1, and anytime I get like flashbanged, it is like I have to close my eyes because with the auto HDR, it does not, compensate for all white, and the monitor itself has some degree of dimming when you get all white, but like that is like I'm turning on my video lights full blast or something for a second, and I'm sitting here like that. But otherwise, it's been a lot better. But you gotta have
EA would take that as a sales pitch. Our war will blind you.
Yeah,
100%.
You'll come home missing legs and be blind. It's the most realistic war tapes experience you've ever seen. Okay, so HDR experience. So Windows 11 seems like a really key feature there, which I've had less positive experiences with Windows 11. Unfortunately, Windows reminds me every goddamn 3 days. But so I'll eventually upgrade. I will actually very soon because I'm installing a 12900K very, very soon actually here. So I'll have to be doing Windows 11 soon enough. But let's move on to the next question here. Welcome to the show, Sam. This is from DAC. What upcoming gaming tech releases are you personally looking forward to? A bit open-ended, so keep it light.
I want a Switch Pro. I want whatever Nintendo's got next. I wrote a thing that people made fun of me for a while, where I overheard someone in Seattle say that they worked for Nintendo and they were working on the thing after the Switch, which was completely unsurprising that exists. But also I looked around like, is this a hidden camera show? Like, who would say that near me at a Mexican restaurant in Seattle? It was, there's so many tech things I could look forward to, but because Nintendo has had this kind of comfort position of continuing to sell both full-price Switch hardware and full-price software. I mean, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is never going on sale. Like that will always continue to be MSRP, that price. I mean, obviously they'll make more money if they get people excited to buy new things and upgrade. And we all are pretty convinced that all of the leaks were about a thing that was going to come out. And then they go, yeah, you know what? We're going to delay it between the chip shortage and our ability to sell this stuff. So like that, obviously they're making something, and I don't believe it's just going to be Switch 2. I do believe I don't have insider tracks on this stuff, I'm sad to say, but I do believe it's going to have some sort of slightly different thing, but it will still be like Nintendo's first real backwards compatibility in a modern way, as opposed to, oh, the Wii U is a Wii, or the GameCube and the Wii, or the duct tape GameCubes together. Like, I do think that's going to come into play, and I'm curious about that. And then that's probably the shortest answer. There's all kinds of tech that I'm interested in. That's what I love doing what I do. So there.
All right, so this was just a question for Sam, but honestly, Adam, it also applies to you really well. What's the next thing you're really excited about?
My Steam Deck gets here next week, so I'm finally joining that train. Very excited. Already have a bunch of accessories here, just waiting on it to show up. Also interested to hear about what they're going to do with Switch Pro. There's been so much speculation that just seems very strange. Like my thing is, Nintendo cannot resist putting gimmicks into their console, like to make it the next cool thing. And so I also agree that we're not going to get a Switch 2 that is just a Switch again, but better. And so I'm kind of scared of what they're going to take a gamble on again, because we seem to have this cadence of like, they knock it out of the park and then they do something really weird that doesn't do well, and then they knock it out of the park. So we're kind of due for a not so great gimmick. But everyone's talking about using the NVIDIA, Shield upscaling and stuff, and that doesn't sound like Nintendo. Like they don't do that kind of thing.
It's not their selling point. It's not the selling point for them. So yeah, it's interesting. Yeah,
I'm hesitant, but for now, I've got the Steam Deck, and I'm excited to see what that can do and push it to its limits.
I forgot to add PlayStation VR 2. I cannot wait to see how they nail. It sounds like they're not really doing anything too wild, but haptic feedback in the head and the hands in concert. Nobody has done it, certainly not at scale. And I don't think it's going to like rumble in a way that gives you headaches, but I think that just a little tiny addition and all of the other little tweaks they do for comfort and all that other stuff, I am really hopeful that they nail it, because y'all may know, not a really big fan of, I used to call it the Facebookening of VR, but now I call it the metastasis of VR. Like, I'm really happy to see people take that out in a way where they're like, we're not going to put an identity grabbing OS onto your virtual reality experience. So between that and Sony's AAA games, like that to me, at the very least, even if it tanks commercially, I'm excited to try it out technically.
Yeah, props on Sony for still investing in VR the way they do. Okay, next question here from Sloth. If streaming had been around in the 90s, what games do you think would have been the most popular ones to watch at the time? So this is talking about passive streaming, like watching streamers. Which ones do you think would have been the most popular?
I'm just rewinding to the weird television shows that tried to feature video games in the 90s, but because the culture wasn't necessarily defined in a way that was beyond, well, kids like Mario and Sonic, they were always just very weird. So I have to imagine streaming in the 90s would have been defined by television and cable networks, at least in the West, at least in the United States. So it would have been, MTV's The Grind video game edition, where there's just a bunch of people like dancing around while PlayStation games, like, you would have like Wipeout while like sexy ladies were dancing around. That would be streaming in the 90s. That's just on a market level. I think this person's asking about like what games would have actually taken off. I just don't know that the 90s, that anyone was ready for this concept of, we're hanging out with somebody and talking and while they play games, because that's the thing in streaming that really matters. I just remember MSNBC made a big deal about having a chat room that was hosted. This was back when Microsoft was truly invested in MSNBC as MSN, and you would tune into the news, and during off hours, they would have a person come in every 10 minutes and say, here's what people in the chat are saying. And the producer would pluck out specific things that didn't have curse words or were kind of safe. And I was a teenager at the time, and I would get onto those chat rooms and hope that I would get one of my quotes on the air, which is kind of similar to that Twitch way of like getting parasocially invested. It clearly didn't take off. You didn't see, Tom Brokaw really get down with Twitch chat.
Adam, what would these games be? What would these 90s streams be?
I'm just picturing it. So it's hard because I think a lot of what I'm conjuring up would be things that, again, weren't established in that kind of community regard until the early 2000s instead of the 90s. Like, if we're talking about the 90s, it might be easy to point to, like, what the equivalent e-sporty kind of thing was, since that's kind of, the big things on Twitch. So, like, your Unreal Tournaments and your Quakes and stuff. But you got to think back to what were people actually trying to talk about publicly in that regard, and it wasn't that. It'd be, I'm imagining a mix of like very early Tech TV G4, but also like blended with, like you said, the weird MTV stuff, and then like Sega commercials where it's just like, today we're playing the Crash Bandicoot, and just
and they zooming in on the screen. Horrible 90s stuff.
Capture wasn't common or like feasible real time, so like trying to make it as realistic for the time as possible. Like, we're looking at shots of TVs and kids just fake the bad kids toy commercials where they're just like and just like, I don't think it would have been very watchable. So it's very hard to frame it that way just because the scene was so different.
The games that would have had the best shot, I think, would have been Gran Turismo and any fighting game of the day. I think if you're just on a games level, just because when you think about what people were crowding around in groups and having anything social, it was Gran Turismo and fighting games. Maybe GoldenEye, maybe 4-player split screen, 12 frames a second kind of combat. That could have been it as well. But I think it was a lot more competitive and a lot less like, speed running wasn't even really a concept. And
right.
It wasn't watchable.
Yeah, it's very small at that point in time.
The game tapes of just like, to beat this boss, you need to go under this level and press the A button.
Yeah, like guides, like guides and stuff. Like, because there was VHS guides and there were like game preview VHSs and things like that are actually very interesting. In Germany, there was also a teletext system, which was like a computerized system of displaying information on television screens. And it had like the interface of a computer, and it was very interesting looking, and it's like not a lot of people talk about it, but I could imagine that over the teletext system they could show like games of like Pong and stuff like that. They could totally do that.
Because the question said if streaming had been around, I thought they meant the Sega channel, which let you download games. Or there was also the BS Satellaview in Japan, which streamed music or radio broadcasts over games. You had to play a certain Zelda spinoff at certain hours of the day so that the radio broadcast would be in sync with you as you played that thing. That's not the question, but hi, I'm old.
That's the way it would be done. Some really obscure way that only 10 nerds would buy. Okay, so next question here from Jacob Godserve. I think that's right. What is your preferred way to make high-quality VOD for editing? As an amateur OBS user, I found it really difficult to dial in the best recording options for getting great high-quality 1080p 60 VOD in a game like Final Fantasy XIV. Because I'm running a GTX 1080 with the NVENC encoder, and it's old, I've been leaning on my 5900X core count to punch through a higher bitrate X264, but I still get a lot of macro blocking. Is it time for a new GPU? This is definitely an Adam question.
Yeah, so for the sake of brevity, so we don't get super nerdy in this video, I have lots of help for that. Don't manually set a bitrate. Use what's called CQP, which is a basically constant quality mode, and you can still use your 1080 for NVENC, and that will just automatically give you all the bitrate you need for a set quality. Set it to CQP of 14. That's visually lossless for 1080p, and you should have basically no issues.
That's really simple advice. Thank you, Adam, and I'm pretty sure Jacob will be very happy about that as well too. Okay, next question is from Bjork Tribe, I believe. I don't know if it's the singer or just the name. It's definitely the singer. Thank you, Bjork, for writing in. Oh my gosh. Thinking of adding a Stream Deck to my home office. I don't stream, but I do a lot of repetitive tasks, and I can't help but feel it might be help to have a bunch of hotkeys. Any other desk peripherals I should consider? For those who don't know in the audience, a Stream Deck is like a little tiny, almost numpad that you can assign macro key functions to. Some of it actually plugs in natively into certain programs, and it just does things when you click things. It's like hotkeys on an older keyboard. Like that would bring up, like, I don't know, your mailbox and things like that. So, but Addie, not Addie, oh my God, Adam. Audie's not here.
I am Addie Surly today. So yes, it is something that I have seen everyone from broadcast industry people to just people who do spreadsheets all day use. It is something that would help anyone who, even if they don't stream, because you can get super granular with what they call multi-actions and have like hotkeys upon hotkeys happen at the same time. There's a lot you could do. I would, however, point out that if you're not streaming and you're not into the gamer streamer aesthetic, there are just plain like macro keypads you can buy from companies like Genovation and a bunch of other companies, or there's a lot of just like enthusiasts who sell just like basic little keypad macro pads where you can program them to do anything you want effectively with auto hotkey. Whereas if you're interested in the setup process, it will be cheaper and not, if you're not a streamer, you probably don't want to look like a streamer. So that's fair. So that is available to you as well, that I would probably suggest if you're not wanting to spend a whole bunch of money.
I don't have anything to suggest for productivity. I just really like these mouse pads with little gel guys on them. 3M they called it back in the day, they called it the precise mousing surface, which is the stupidest name for a mouse pad ever. I got it just because I loved how dumb that name was. I've been through maybe 6 of these in my life. I love them. That's it. Those macro pads, if they sound good to you, go ahead. I also have a standing desk. I always
ergonomics are huge.
Find ways to stand up for a little while, however, or get an exercise ball. That ergonomic stuff is gonna make you productive as an adult with less pain and more health.
So let's move on here to the next question from Nuclear Gandhi. Hello to the most bespoke DF crew. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I believe all 3 of you own and have used the Steam Deck. Sorry, Adam. This crew has made previous attempts at delving into the Linux ecosystem as a full OS. Have we? I don't know if we've actually done that. People here have, though. I definitely think you have, Adam. With EposVox's infamous or famous video being a prominent example. After using the Steam OS, do you think anything to help ramp on a newbie better that has been done before? If not, do you think open source projects are destined forever to have a user experience problem due to their decentralized nature, or any similar inherent in their setup?
I mean, my feeling on this is a lot of people, when they just use a computer in their daily life, are mostly using a web browser. I think so much stuff that you do with email and with office management, I mean, goodness, you can even run Slack on a tab, all that sort of thing. Because we have moved into a web browser centric kind of work life, and depending on where you work and if you work remotely, then app installation also really matters, and that can make or break acceptance. But just the ability to open on Steam Deck, just switch to the desktop mode and you're in KDE, and it's like, right, that looks a lot like Windows. So just on that level, sure, there's some sense of people can find a way to go, I understand this, I recognize this because it resembles Mac OS or Windows. But it's really about those edge cases. Will it do every single thing I need it to do? And I think there are just a lot of people whose daily work life means I need my desktop to do specific stuff. And that's just a case-by-case deal of like, oh, the lack of specific browser support on Linux means I can't do this, or a certain kind of app I need for my work, I can't do that. That to me is sort of the greater deal than about UX.
My history with Linux is very amusingly documented on YouTube. I actually started with it in the 90s, and then I've had some very specific videos where I try to put it to use for that specific use case, because everyone's, championing it as being usable for everything, and it doesn't always work out for me in that regard. But I firmly believe that the Steam Deck is exactly what Linux excels at, is someone else who is smarter than the average user builds this completely not closed, it's open source, but put together perfectly designed ecosystem to game on, and manages it all and sets it up for you. And they have the flexibility to do that. That's the reason Valve chose Linux over Windows, is they have complete control over what they can build. And that is phenomenal. And that is why these kinds of tools will always use either custom OSs, like the old consoles used to be based off BSD. They're not using Windows most of the time unless they're from Microsoft. They are, building based on these custom kernels and these custom things because they can control it and build this perfect ecosystem for the Steam Deck. Whereas an average user being tasked to install Linux and configure it to look like the Steam Deck on their own with the tools that are out there is not going to happen. And I think that's the big disconnect, is the average user desktop experience, once they want to make something more specific beyond web browsing, is so inaccessible, but the tools are there. Whereas a company utilizing those tools to the fullest extent to build the perfect product based on that, Steam Deck is the shining example of exactly how Linux should be used in a consumer environment. And Windows is an option, and I've seen people have reviews where they're like, well, I went to install Game Pass and you can't run EXEs on Linux. What is happening? There's always a little disconnect there, but I think they get to build their own gaming operating system effectively, and that is exactly what Linux is designed for.
Yeah, it's maybe not a general user experience thing for most. I mean, people are swearing by Chromebooks occasionally and things like that. It's really, I don't know. I definitely don't have a very high opinion of using Linux for just day-to-day work, because I've been usually married to like very specific things that are only usually available on Windows. And that's part of my workflow. And that gets back to what Sam said, really, that like if you are married to a certain workflow that requires certain programs that do not have Linux distributions and or their Linux open source equivalents maybe are not the easiest to use, easiest to set up, or don't have the functions you want, well, then you're kind of stuck. And that's where I've been for a long time. So I don't invest much time in Linux, unfortunately.
If Valve was prioritizing the desktop, average experience where people could install and do their own things, it would be more like the GPD Win little mini laptop computer things. That's not what Valve wanted. Those are cool, but that, it's very different use cases, and they decided to build SteamOS.
SteamOS is way functional, though, and I think the KDE thing is also. Like, I just used it recently to drop some emulators on the Steam Deck. It was really cool. All right, so next question. These are some shorter ones. Do you still use your Playdate, Sam? And are you disgusted by its lack of ray tracing, Alex? You can totally ray trace on a Playdate. Probably be like 1 frame per second, but it'd be awesome.
The answer's yes. Next question. I mean, the thing about Playdate is that I know if I want to turn off my brain and have some compact gaming, this is as good as I'm going to get. And I think that's just not everybody's cup of tea, but I can be overwhelmed. I am in a fortunate position to have a job where I'm playing a lot of things, testing a lot of things. And sometimes I want to know that the device I'm playing a game on is only going to play that game. No patches, no online, simple. The biggest bummer to me is that this thing is still not quite to the point of being able to neatly emulate the original Game Boy. There is at least one person out there just whipped up a working Game Boy emulator that's got weird pixel scaling and weird animation issues because it's pretty low powered. I would love for this to just for me able to dump a few Game Boy ROMs into. But I like the software that came out. If you bought this on launch day and you got in on that very early point, then you have all of the games now. That 12-week season has concluded, and there hasn't been an announcement of more games to come. But I would say there's 6 games on this that I go back to that I enjoy. Out of 24, not bad. But no, this is not for everybody. My brain is in a specific way where I bond to it in a way that I think a lot of people will be like, not a big deal, and that's great. This is an option. It's not a requirement.
Next question here from Who the Hell Ami?
Who the hell am I?
Who the hell am Oh, yeah, I think this is
question.
Yeah. What's a game that you loved when you were younger, but now don't look back on as fondly? Be it because of gameplay, graphics, or whatever, and why?
The obvious answer here is Turok. I'm kidding.
Be that way. Don't be that guy.
I'm kidding.
I know, but Turok is actually an easy one to say for most people.
Well, I mean, Turok. I like Turok too. I mean, those are the kind of games where I just want to kind of game genie my way through because there's some real fun to be had, but I kind of want to go a lot faster. I don't know. I don't have a lot of gaming shame. I think the biggest one for me is Earthworm Jim. I don't think that game aged as well as the teenager in me wished. I don't think that it's necessarily that great of a platformer, especially like as I get older and look back, I go, oh man, the Saturn has so much stuff that I really cherish a lot more than something like Earthworm Jim. So that's probably my easiest answer.
For me, I've never really like not looked back on a game poorly because of its graphics like that. I always appreciate graphics in the context of what it's running on. There's lots of games on every system that look stellar based on what they were running on. But for me, it comes down to like, I've gotten too used to modern mechanics and control conveniences that sometimes playing older titles I just can't get adjusted to anymore. Like I remember loving some of the first person shooter options on PS1, and I've been trying to go back to them, and it's like impossible to play now. Like, when I'm used to Halo modernized dual stick controls, it's so hard to. And then like I looked back, like the PS2 Prince of Persia games were like some of my top like favorite games for a long time, but I stopped playing them forever. And then going back, having played Assassin's Creed, like they control so much more finicky, like it's the polish isn't there. You're fighting things that you expect to work a certain way because it's literally the same control scheme just evolved, and that's not there. Like those are the things that really hiccup for me, is like when I'm expecting a modern control system to work out, and it's just like it was fine for the time, but like it is so hard to go back to. And those bug me a lot because I want to still enjoy the games, but I can't. And those are the rare circumstances where I will, like, I generally prefer playing older games within the context that they were released on the older systems when I can. But when the controls are that much like harder for me to tolerate, then I will always prefer to go for whatever HD port or remaster or collection pack or whatever was released, just to get the modern control scheme, even if the graphics emulation and stuff isn't always great.
Boy, wouldn't it be great if there was a Prince of Persia remaster project that would ever come out, huh?
Yeah, no, that's gone. So for me, there's two scenarios here that I'm thinking about where games are just really hard to go back to. And one is like older RPGs, JRPGs, 2D games, usually that have a lot of text in them, and they have very poor text scrolling or text speed. And you've played these games before, and you're just like waiting for the really slow text to show up, and it just goes on and on. And or like, you go through and there's a lot of random encounters that are hard to get through. It's very grindy. I have less time for those things these days. So it's a little bit of a shame. And that's where emulating comes in handy, when you can like just really quickly dial up the game speed, bring it back down again, and things like that. So that's where emulation comes in handy. Also with ROM hacks. You're sorry, Adam?
I was just going to say, I have found it interesting how used to I've gotten, since you brought that up, to like pacing of getting into gameplay, where even modern games that have that older style of like taking forever to get you started kind of really drag the experience for me. I finally picked up, because it's free on PlayStation Plus, Warhammer Chaos Bane, which is like a little Diablo-like clone. And the gameplay is like fun for what it is, but there is 10-15 minutes of it just like showing me still images with text and dialogue to just like tell me the story, instead of showing me things with cutscenes or letting me play it. And even like a story beat, like you go in and you fight the boss, and then it takes control away from you, and it just tells you the story with like still images. And I'm like, what year is this? This feels like I want to get in and play. I don't have time to like sit there and be told the story anymore. And so yeah.
The question isn't quite asking this, but the thing I loved when I was younger that I don't get as much is the ability to break that out. I've got my instruction manual. I can read that while I'm waiting for the game to install, or waiting to get screen time, or whatever it is that's keeping me away. Like, that thing gets lost when we go back to older games now. So like, maybe I'm frustrated by an older game, but well, back in the day, I could like pore over the map or read the strategy guide or pick through the instructions again and again. And that changes that kind of nostalgia thing of like looking back, go, well, I don't like the game as much now, but I'm also not, an 8-year-old.
Yeah. And the last thing that I was going to talk about that is actually related to both of what you said was, I actually used to like rare games a lot in the 90s and the N64 ones. I was a big fan of Jet Force Gemini, and now I recently went back and tried to play it a bit. There was a bit of control issues because it's pre-standardization of third-person platforming and third-person controlling. So it's pretty rough sometimes, especially the camera and switching between shooting and moving. But then the other issue was there's just rare games, and there's modes and things that become, how do you call it, like fashionable. And collectathon games were fashionable at some point. You've got your Gex, you've got your whatever, you've got all these mascot games, and rare games devolved into that at some point in time, at some point in the story where you need to have collected a certain amount of things to progress. And it's like, oh, I don't want to spend my time doing this. and I just...
If you kill any of those little critters, I forget their name, you can't actually beat the game, go back and redo that entire thing, because one little stupid jerk, the AI ran it.
Yeah, I just ran out and you shot him, and with that horrible N64 controller. I recently got some crap under a video for ragging on the N64 controller, but I'm serious, man. That controller, I don't get it.
That's Stockholm syndrome. As someone who reviewed N64 games in the 90s, I can tell you had to convert your brain to it. So I get why people would hate you forever for having any honest feeling.
But yes, I think, we're almost hitting 2 hours now. This has been an epic DF Direct for the ages. We're definitely going to do it again. I think I've had a lot of fun with this one. Yeah, Hot Boy Summer is going to continue on. Global warming is only going to get worse. I'm so sorry. But this was an amazing episode of DF Direct. I'm so glad both you, Sam, and Adam came out to join me for this. This was so much fun.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you for having me on.
Thanks for inviting us. DF fans, I'll see you in the Discord.
In the Discord,
Same.
Yes. Okay, so that's the end of our episode. Please like, subscribe, hit that button in the corner, the bell for notionally instant notifications, as Rich would say. Support us on Patreon. Years worth of our content and high quality for download. Like, subscribe. I've already said that. This is Alex saying Auf Wiedersehen und bye.